Dear learners, welcome back to WSE Legendary Lives, where learning English opens the doors to ancient wisdom and timeless tales. Let your imagination awaken. Today, we set sail into one of the most enduring stories ever told. A tale whispered through sacred texts, echoed in art and poetry, and still alive in the collective memory of cultures across the world. The story of a man not chosen for his strength, not for his brilliance, but for something far more mysterious, his quiet obedience. His name is Noah. He lived in a time when the earth was soaked in violence, when human hearts had grown cold and chaotic. And yet, in the middle of all that noise, one man listened. One man walked a different path, not to be praised, but simply because he believed. This is not just the story of a flood. It's a mirror reflecting the storms within us. It's about trust, fear, courage, and the heavy price of turning away from what's right. It's about building something, not just an ark, but a way forward, when the world seems lost. So, as you listen, you won't just practice English. You'll explore the kind of questions that echo across generations. What do we stand for when no one is watching? What do we save when everything is at stake? If you'd like to support the channel and unlock some exclusive perks, just click the join button below. We'll share more about the membership program at the end of this video. Now, let the waves rise. Let the legend begin. Long before the flood, before the first drop of rain had ever fallen from a vengeful sky, there was a world that had forgotten itself. According to ancient tradition, particularly from the Hebrew Bible's book of Genesis, echoed in the Quran, and reflected in Mesopotamian flood myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, Noah lived in a time when the world was no longer ruled by harmony, but by hubris. Humanity had multiplied, but with each generation, something sacred slipped away. Justice became rare. Mercy was mocked. Greed sat on thrones, and violence grew like weeds in the soil of civilization. It is said that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, a mysterious verse many interpret as symbolic of unchecked desire, power without conscience. The natural balance between heaven and earth had been disrupted. The people of Noah's time were not merely wicked in action, but willfully deaf to wisdom, blind to the suffering of others, and arrogant in their rebellion against the moral laws that had once guided humanity. Into this moral wasteland, Noah was born. He was not royalty, not a warrior, nor a prophet in the dramatic sense. His background is simple: a family man, a man of the land, perhaps a carpenter or farmer. Yet what set him apart was his heart, described as righteous in his generation, a phrase that glows like a lantern in the dark. It didn't mean he was perfect. It meant he was awake, aware that something had gone terribly wrong, and quietly devoted to something greater than himself. Noah's world was like ours in many ways, rich in knowledge, but poor in wisdom. People built cities, traded goods, raised children, and made music, yet they had lost their inner compass. Sound familiar? Myths like this one didn't survive thousands of years because they were entertaining. They survived because they asked the same haunting question in every age: what happens when a society forgets the sacred? When progress outpaces morality? When comfort silences conscience? This was the world into which Noah was born, a world beautiful on the surface, but cracking beneath the weight of its own corruption. And in that collapsing world, the most unimaginable message was about to arrive. Not from a king. Not from a neighbor. But from the divine itself, a whisper into one man's heart, calling him to build something no one had ever seen, for a storm no one believed would come. But that was only the beginning. The first imbalance was yet to test him, and it wouldn't come from outside, but from within his own village, his own people, his own blood. Noah had always felt different, not in a proud or boastful way, but in the quiet way someone feels when they see what others refuse to notice. He watched the world around him with a kind of aching clarity. In the markets, people shouted over each other, driven not by need but by greed. On the streets, cruelty passed as entertainment. Sacred rituals had become hollow performances, and those who still believed in goodness were mocked as naive. Even in his own extended family, Noah felt the pressure to conform, to laugh when others laughed, to pretend that everything was fine. But everything was not fine. There was a heaviness in the air, like a storm building behind the mountains. Noah couldn't explain it, not even to his wife or sons, but he sensed that something fundamental had broken. He saw children raised without reverence, land exploited without care, and leaders who ruled not to protect, but to dominate. Still, he lived simply. He taught his children to be kind. He worked with wood and soil, hands worn by labor but guided by a quiet inner rhythm, a faith that whispered, "Hold on. Even if no one else does." That whisper grew stronger the day the message came. It wasn't a voice like thunder. It didn't split the sky. It came like a knowing, one so profound it stilled his breath. A calling not born of imagination, but of deep, unshakable conviction. Build an ark. The words didn't make sense. There was no sea nearby, no sign of disaster. And yet, the instructions were detailed, urgent, and specific. The message was clear: a great flood was coming, a cleansing of the earth. Not out of rage, but sorrow. The world had corrupted itself beyond repair. But Noah had been found worthy to survive, not just to survive, but to preserve life. To carry it forward. This was the first great test, not of hammers and nails, but of courage. Because when Noah picked up that first tool, when he carved the first timber of the ark, he knew exactly what would happen. The mocking began almost immediately. Neighbors laughed behind his back. "Has Noah lost his mind?" they sneered. "Is he building a house for the clouds?" Even old friends turned distant. Some whispered that he had gone mad. Others came to watch him work like he was a strange kind of theater. And yet, he didn't stop. Each board was not just wood, it was faith. Each swing of the hammer, a prayer. The ark was not just a boat. It was defiance against despair. A choice to believe in something greater than himself, even when the skies were still clear. Can you imagine what that must have felt like? To keep building while the world laughed? To remain faithful when every voice around you says, "You're a fool"? Was Noah a prophet, or simply a man who refused to give up on the sacred? Perhaps the deeper question is, would you have done the same? Would you build something for a future no one else believes in? The rain hadn't fallen yet. But the world around him was already drowning, in its own doubt, in its own decay. And the true test had only just begun. Day by day, Noah continued to build. There were no signs in the sky. No trembling of the earth. Just silence. Sunlight. Laughter from the crowds who came to watch him like a performer in a tragic play. But still, he carved. Still, he measured the wood and followed the divine instructions down to the last cubit. It was slow work, not just the physical labor, but the emotional toll of isolation. Even his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, felt the weight. They believed in their father, yes, but they were young. They saw their friends drift away, saw the sideways glances, heard the gossip. Sometimes they asked, "Father, are you sure?" And Noah would pause, eyes tired but unwavering, and reply, "I am not sure of the world, but I am sure of what's been placed in my heart." As the ark rose from the dust like a great, hulking shadow, the ridicule turned to fear. Whispers spread, "What if he's right?" But admitting that meant confronting everything they had ignored, every injustice, every cruel joke, every betrayal of conscience. And so, most chose mockery over repentance. Easier to laugh than to change. And then the animals began to come. Two by two, as if summoned by some silent force, the great and the small, the fierce and the fragile. Lions walked beside lambs. Birds circled overhead. Insects hummed through the air. It was a moment so surreal, so sacred, even the loudest critics fell silent. Still, the people did not turn. Some tried to explain it away. It's just a coincidence. Some kind of trick. Others called it sorcery. But deep down, many felt something stir, awe, perhaps, or regret. Noah watched them, not with anger, but with sorrow. He had spent years building an ark to save lives. But only his family would enter. As the final beam was secured and the last creature stepped aboard, the skies began to change. The clouds gathered like a slow exhale from the heavens. The wind shifted. The birds no longer sang. The air smelled of earth, heavy and waiting. And then, a single drop. Then another. Then the sky opened like a wound. Rain poured down with a fury the world had never seen. It didn't fall, it attacked. It soaked the soil, drowned the streets, swept away the crops. Rivers rose. Wells overflowed. People ran, screamed, clung to rooftops, begged the sky to stop. But it did not. Noah, inside the ark, heard it all, the cries, the chaos, the crashing of water against stone. And he wept. Because this was not victory. This was loss. The kind of loss that leaves you hollow, even when you survive. And yet, amidst the flood, there was also something else, stillness. Inside the ark, surrounded by his family and the breath of every kind of animal, Noah experienced a strange peace, not joy, but a sacred quiet. He had done all he could. The rest was not in his hands. Now the journey had truly begun. The waters would rise for 40 days and nights. The world outside would be washed away. But inside that wooden vessel floated the future. The question now was not just would they survive, but how would they live after the storm? Was this flood a punishment or a rebirth? And beneath it all, one question lingers for us today. Is this story simply fantasy, or a mirror to something inside all of us? Because the flood may be ancient, but the storm, the one that tests our conscience, our faith, our courage, that storm still rages in every age. The rain fell without mercy. Day after day, night after night. What began as a whisper from the sky had become a roar that shook the earth. It rained not just from above, but from below, ancient fountains bursting forth from the deep, as if the very bones of the earth were weeping. Inside the ark, Noah and his family lived in a strange rhythm. Time lost its shape. Day and night blended into one long vigil. The animals stirred and slept, each according to its nature. The scent of damp wood and straw filled the air. The creaking of the great vessel became a kind of heartbeat, reminding them they were still afloat. But survival was not easy. Imagine being sealed in with the future of life itself, not for hours, not for days, but for over a year. 40 days and nights of rain were only the beginning. The floodwaters covered the earth for 150 days. Then came the long, uncertain waiting, for signs, for hope, for solid ground. Food supplies had to be rationed. Tempers flared. Grief visited silently, unspoken but shared. No one knew what had become of the world outside. Had anything survived? Would anything remain? And worst of all, was it worth it? Noah's greatest trial was not physical, but spiritual. He had obeyed. He had endured the ridicule, the labor, the loneliness. And yet, there were moments, deep, quiet moments, when doubt knocked at his heart. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that whispers in the dark. Did I misunderstand? Was the cost too great? Will this ever end? It was then that he reached for something deeper than certainty, faith without evidence. Not blind faith, but tested faith. The kind that remains even when the sky is silent. One morning, Noah opened a small window, not to escape, but to hope. He released a raven into the vast, watery sky. It flew back and forth, searching for land. Days later, he released a dove. It returned with nothing. But he sent it again. And again. And finally, one day, it came back with something extraordinary, a small, green olive leaf held gently in its beak. That fragile branch meant everything. It was proof that life had not ended. That somewhere, beyond the endless gray, a tree had survived. A root had held on. The earth was breathing again. The ark drifted no longer on chaos, but toward restoration. Eventually, it came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. The doors were opened. The animals stepped out into silence, a world cleansed, quiet, waiting to begin again. The sky was clear. The air, fresh. But the world was no longer the same. Neither was Noah. He knelt on the ground and built an altar, not out of habit, but out of deep, wordless gratitude. He did not thank the storm. He thanked the survival. The mercy. The second chance. But this moment was not just about gratitude. It marked a turning point, the moment when Noah was no longer just a survivor, but a steward. He had not been spared to rest, but to rebuild. And so a covenant was made. Not carved in stone. Not written in ink. But painted across the sky in color, a rainbow. A sign from the divine, a promise that never again would the world be destroyed by flood. It was not just a symbol of protection, but of trust. Humanity would fail again, but never be wiped away. Instead of destruction, there would be guidance. Is the rainbow just a natural refraction of light, or something more? Some say it's a message to the heart, that even after devastation, beauty can return. Noah had passed through the waters of judgment, carried not by strength, but by obedience and hope. And now, as he stood beneath that vast arc of light, he understood, the flood wasn't just to wash the earth. It was to cleanse the soul. But the true climax of Noah's journey, his greatest transformation, was still to come. Because surviving the storm is one thing. Becoming someone new after the storm, that is the greater challenge. The flood was over. The ground was dry. The ark had done its duty. But now came a moment that no one prepares for, beginning again. For Noah, the silence of the post-flood world was more unsettling than the chaos of the storm. There were no more cries, no more footsteps of the old world. Just wind, rustling leaves, the distant call of animals exploring their reclaimed freedom, and the weight of an unspoken question pressing into every sunrise. Now what? The flood had ended a chapter, but it had not erased memory. The pain of what was lost clung like morning mist: family, neighbors, a civilization. Noah carried not just survivor's guilt, but something deeper, the awareness that he had been part of something so much larger than himself. That survival comes with responsibility. And yet, even chosen men are still human. In the biblical account, we read of Noah planting a vineyard. It seems simple, an act of renewal. But there is something poignant, even tragic, in what follows. One day, Noah drinks too much of the wine. He becomes drunk. He lies uncovered in his tent. Vulnerable. Exposed. This moment is often overlooked, but it may be the most human part of the entire legend. After all he had endured, the divine voice, the mockery, the construction, the isolation, the flood, the loss, the rebirth, Noah collapses. Not physically, but emotionally. He breaks under the weight of it all. And in that vulnerable state, his dignity falters. Was this a fall from grace? Or was it the revelation that even the faithful have limits? This is the climax of Noah's transformation, not the building of the ark, not the endurance of the storm, but this fragile, honest moment when he becomes fully human before us. The myth allows him to break. And in doing so, it asks a quiet question of us. Must our heroes be perfect to be sacred? Because what happens next matters more. One of his sons, Ham, sees Noah's vulnerability and responds with disrespect. He exposes his father's shame to his brothers. But the other two, Shem and Japheth, respond differently. They walk backward, covering Noah without looking at him, preserving his dignity with tenderness and respect. This is not just a story about wine. It is a story about how we respond to the weakness of others. It asks, do we exploit it, or protect it? Do we use another's lowest moment to elevate ourselves, or to show compassion? This final moral moment transforms Noah's story from a survival tale to a profound reflection on humility. He was chosen, yes. But he was not above weakness. He was righteous, yes. But still capable of falling. He was obedient, yes. But still a man of flesh and fragility. And that is what makes Noah enduring. Not that he was a perfect hero, but that he was a true one. He remained faithful when mocked. He built when others destroyed. He endured when others perished. And when he faltered, he still chose reverence. Perhaps the deeper message is this: faith is not about never falling. It's about what we do after the fall. Noah's story invites us into a deeper kind of strength, one that includes vulnerability, one that accepts the weight of divine purpose without pretending to be flawless. And so, the man who once built an ark now builds something even more important, a legacy of reverence, humility, and second chances. He reminds us that even those chosen to carry the future must first confront the shadows within themselves. If you could ask Noah one question, what would it be? Because before he became legend, he was simply a man, with fears, with flaws, and with the courage to carry the world anyway. After the storm, after the silence, after the brokenness of his own heart, Noah did something simple: he stayed. He didn't vanish into legend or seek power as a prophet. He did not raise monuments to himself, nor declare dominion over the cleansed earth. Instead, he returned to the soil, to the work of rebuilding. One seed at a time. The ark, once the vessel of survival, was left behind, its purpose fulfilled. Now, The true test was not whether Noah could escape destruction, but whether he could help restore what was lost, not just trees and animals, but the moral fabric of humanity. He and his sons began again, planting, building homes, retaming the wild. It was the beginning of a new lineage, a new chapter for the earth. But this new world, though cleaner, was not perfect. Because human nature had not been erased by the flood. It had only been given a new chance. And this is where Noah's legacy quietly deepens. Through his descendants, nations would rise. The world would diversify. Stories would spread, of stars and sand, of kings and prophets, of suffering and redemption. Many would forget Noah's name. Others would mythologize it. But within every story that came afterward, a quiet echo remained, the memory of a man who chose faith over fear, obedience over pride, patience over popularity. Across cultures and continents, his story lived on, not just in religious scripture, but in folklore, in literature, in moral tradition. In the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, a similar flood figure named Utnapishtim survives by divine warning. In Hindu texts, Manu builds a boat after being warned by a fish, the god Vishnu in disguise. In each case, the flood is not merely an event. It is a threshold, a line between old and new, chaos and order, self and higher purpose. Noah became a symbol not of perfection, but of preservation. A quiet guardian of continuity. A man who, when everyone else turned away, still listened to the voice that called him to build. And this is the legacy he leaves us, that in every age of corruption, someone must remain faithful. In every storm, someone must carry the future. And after every destruction, someone must choose to rebuild, not with vengeance, but with reverence. The rainbow, once stretched across a lonely sky, became a sign across generations, a covenant not just with Noah, but with all of humanity. That while storms may come, and floods may rise, we are never without the possibility of renewal. That's the power of Noah's story, not in its spectacle, but in its steadiness. He was never the loudest. Never the strongest. But he was the one who remained. And maybe that's the kind of hero the world needs most. Because in the end, it's not the storm that defines a legend, it's what they do when the storm has passed. Noah's story may seem like a tale from a forgotten time, a man, an ark, a flood. But beneath the wood and water lies a reflection of something eternal. At its core, this is not a story about rain. It is a story about responsibility. The flood represents more than nature's wrath. It is a symbol of the consequences we create when we turn away from what is just, compassionate, and true. It's a mirror held up to every civilization, every generation that grows too proud, too deaf, too numb. When people stop listening to conscience, when we exploit, when we ignore suffering, when we glorify greed, something always breaks. Whether it's the environment, society, or the soul, the flood comes. But Noah reminds us that even in a world adrift in corruption, one person's integrity can matter. The ark is more than a boat. It's a metaphor for the inner shelter we must build in times of chaos, a space within us made of values, patience, courage, and obedience to something greater than ego. We are all asked, at some point, to build our own ark, not to escape, but to protect what is most sacred. And the rainbow? It is not just a beautiful symbol in the sky. It's a bridge between judgment and mercy. Between despair and promise. It tells us that rebirth is possible, but only when we remember the cost of forgetting who we are. Noah's journey also teaches us that transformation often comes after the crisis, that the hardest part is not surviving the storm, but becoming worthy of the new life that follows. When he planted the vineyard and faltered, it was a reminder that even those chosen can stumble. But the story doesn't end there. What matters is not the fall, but how we rise, how we protect each other's dignity, how we respond with compassion rather than shame. So what does this myth mean for us today? Perhaps it means that each of us carries the choice to follow the crowd or to walk quietly with conviction, to ignore the signs or to build something lasting, to repeat the past or to create a future where reverence is not forgotten. Noah didn't save the world. He preserved the possibility of one. And that may be the greatest lesson of all. Do you feel this ancient legend speaks to your life in some way? Because whether you believe it as history or hear it as parable, the message is the same: storms will come, but if we live with courage, humility, and vision, we may just carry the light through the darkness. This legend may be ancient, but its message lives on, that faith matters, even when it's mocked, that obedience can be sacred, even when it's silent, and that redemption is not found in avoiding the storm, but in choosing who we become when the waters recede. Noah was not the strongest. He was not the most eloquent. But he was the one who listened when no one else would. And perhaps that is what makes him legendary, not the ark, but the heart behind it. His story is a reminder that we all face floods, moments when the world feels like it's collapsing, when we are asked to believe in something no one else sees. In those moments, may we remember Noah and keep building. So let us leave this story not with answers, but with reflection. Which part of this story stayed with you the most, and why? Was it the courage to begin, the quiet faith, the fragility after survival, or the rainbow that promised we are never truly alone? If this story moved you, consider sharing it. Pass the legend on. Because stories like this were never meant to be buried in the past. They are meant to travel, heart to heart, soul to soul, lighting the path forward. And if you'd like to walk with us through more timeless tales, subscribe to WSE Legendary Lives, where each legend teaches not just English, but something deeper. If you found this story meaningful and want to support the channel, consider becoming a member. As a member, you'll unlock exclusive perks like special custom emojis, members-only videos, early access to upcoming stories before public release. Just click the join button below and explore all the membership options. Until next time, may your heart stay steady through life's storms, and may you always have the courage to build your ark. Farewell for now, and remember, every legend carries a seed of truth.